Okay, looks like most people are in now. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass series. I'm Lisette Martinez, the Network and Learning Coordinator at the National Guild for Community Arts Education. You can refer to me in conversation by name or by she, her, hers. I'm a light-skinned person with some neutral warm undertones. During the summer, I get a little bit more tan. I have long dark brown hair with dark brown eyes and thick eyebrows that I'm very proud of. My hair right now is up in a bun and I'm wearing some silver over the ear headphones. I also have some 3 flat moles on my left cheek. I'm wearing a black dress with a crew neck collar and short sleeves. There are white bands around the edges of the sleeves and around the collar. Behind me are beige walls and a white closet door is to my left. I'm joined by an incredible group of speakers who will introduce themselves to you in just a moment. I'm meeting with you from the unceded land of the Tequesta, Taino, and Seminole peoples. I do want to acknowledge that the Seminole name is a colonized name of the peoples who were originally made up of hundreds of tribes that lived in the Florida Peninsula for thousands of years before colonization, including the Yuchi, Yamasee, Tequesta, or Appalachee. I ask you to join me in honoring these first peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. The National Guild also recognizes that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including the Lenape, on whose land the institution is located. I also acknowledge the trauma that colonialism caused both Indigenous and enslaved African people, not only through slavery, biological warfare, forced sterilization, and forced assimilation, but via structural racism, which allows these racist systems to continue to oppress their descendants today. We honor those who have lived and are living at these intersections of identity and experience. This acknowledgement is a commitment to beginning the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Just going to take a moment to let all of that land. The Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass Dialogue Series is a series of 75-minute-long intimate fishbowl conversations with 6 BIPOC-led arts organizations that center anti-racism in organizational mission and practice. Your video, audio, and chat is disabled. If you want to send love or questions to our speakers, please use the Q&A box. However, reminder that these are fishbowl conversations and we may get to one question if time allows. Reflection sessions provide more co-learning. However, the speakers will not be present during those sessions. Each of our conversations, including today, will be facilitated by Masharika Prejean Maddison, founder of Lightwell Coaching and Consulting. Our follow-up reflection sessions will be led by Toya Lillard, Executive Director of Vibe Theater Experience. The reflection session for today will be on Thursday, November 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we will hear from staff of Ataensic Center for Healing and Creative Leadership, including Carmen Lane, Imani Badillo, and Arthur Russell. We are being supported by Pro Bono ASL. Rory Burton and Selena Flowers will be our ASL interpreters, and Heather Eichmeyer is supporting us as our captioner. Everyone send good energy to everyone today and all of our team today. So this virtual learning series is brought to you by the Music Man Foundation, and thank you for being here. I will now pass it to Masharika.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day. I'm Masharika Prejean Maddison, and it's a pleasure to be here. I use the pronouns she, her. I have short, dark brown, naturally curly hair, which I'm loving in this time that we are in, low maintenance, and as wonderful and curly as it can be. I have glasses to support my vision. and I have a big smile on my face. It almost is more of a grin than a smile right now because I'm so thrilled to be a part of this conversation with Carmen, Imani, and Arthur. I'm coming to you from land originally stewarded by the Sakhalin tribe of the Miwok community in Moraga, California, as it is currently known. And without further ado, I would really like to give our esteemed guests the opportunity to introduce themselves. And perhaps we can go in the order of Carmen, followed by Imani, followed by Arthur, where they can share their names, audio descriptions, and a land acknowledgement if they choose. Thank you.
My name is Carmen Lane. I'm the founder and director of Ataensic Center for Healing and Creative Leadership. As a two-spirit person, I do not have a preferred gender pronoun. I simply wish to be called Carmen. I am African American and Haudenosaunee, Mohawk, and Tuscarora, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio, the Western Territory of the Haudenosaunee. I wear glasses. I always wear a hat, but underneath that hat is salt and pepper, wavy hair that is long and shaved on the sides. It's growing out due to COVID-19. I'm currently wearing a gray sweatshirt. I have glasses on, and I'm wearing a necklace made of wampanoag shells. Thank you, National Guild, for inviting me and my organization and our team to be in this conversation together.
Hello, my name is Imani. I like to be referred to by name or with they, them, theirs pronouns. I am a student at Oberlin College, which is where I am talking to you from. I wear glasses. I have shoulder length dark brown hair that is currently in dreadlocks. I am wearing a gray floral top and two black necklaces, which I wear very consistently. Like I said, I am talking to you from Oberlin, Ohio, which many Oberlin students know as a meeting ground for Potawatomi, Haudenosaunee, and Erie peoples. And the land of Oberlin, Ohio also has a very long legacy connected with the colonial institutions, connected to academia, and has been described as a very open and loving place, while also being described as a very excluding and violent place towards people of color, and Black students and Indigenous students. So this is where I'm meeting you. Thank you. Thank you to the National Guild for including me in this talk, and I'm excited to share.
Hello, and it's a wonderful privilege to be here with you all today. My name is Arthur Russell. I use he, him pronouns. My visual description, I am the educational interventionist at Ataensic. And my visual description would be, I am maybe off beige in better times when I'm in the sun. Non-COVID times, maybe a little more like kind of olive Mediterranean heritage. I have unkept, uncut black hair kind of swooped over to make it look as neat as possible on this video. And I'm wearing one of my favorite outfits of a denim shirt and a wool jacket as I am tried to swaddle myself in to embrace the fall season. I am very grateful to be here.
Thank you again to Carmen, Imani, and Arthur for making the time to be with us today. My first question is for each of you, and just a reminder to loosen our shoulders and get into the conversation, get comfy. The first question, and again, if you'd like, we can go in the same order as we did in introducing ourselves, Carmen, Imani, and Arthur. How are you defining anti-racism in this moment? And maybe to elaborate on that, who and what have been some of the key contributors toward developing your respective anti-racism practices?
So for me, the definition of anti-racism is rooted in what one's attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs are about what racism is, their ability to see and track it in the moment, and how they choose to use themselves in those behaviors to interrupt it in themselves and others, in the communities and structures they're a part of. Given the moment that we are in, I also want to say within a US context, anti-racism is also an anti-violence kind of belief and intervention around disrupting the use, abuse, and misuse of Black bodies in this culture, and the bodies of people who are comparative, right, that are related to a Black body. So it's a continuum of mistreatment based on someone's proximity of being raced as Black in this system.
And Carmen, are there any particular folks or learnings that you've acquired over time that have shaped your definition that you would like to share?
Well, I really want to take a moment to own my own practice as an anti-oppression educator and consultant. So for me, it is both a lifetime of insight, but also a practice that I have developed and invested in over time. So my first kind of inroads into anti-oppression education was as a teenager. I was 14 and I was a part of a project through a program that I don't know if it exists anymore, but it was called the National Conference for Christians and Jews. And so it started out as an organization that dealt with anti-Semitism and racial harmony in a multicultural context. I think art and poetry in particular, the cultural production of women of color and queer women of color, artists and practitioners, have influenced the lenses in which I'm able to understand what racism is and how to disrupt it. So when I think about those artists, I think about Lucille Clifton, Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, Maria Lugones, as a feminist philosopher, Barbara Smith, and the development of Kitchen Table Press. I think about critical race theory, particularly the work of Stuart Hall. I think about early bell hooks, particularly when she started to do work around art theory and criticism. You know, there are individual people in my life. Carol Brantley, NTL Institute for Applied Behavioral Science, Kathy Royal, my grandparents, Paul Murphy and Vivian Murphy, you know, who were very different people, but had particular insights in their lived experience. And then the totality of my meaning making, of integrating those relationships, connections, and experiences to this moment right now with you.
Y'all, we need a resource list. We need a resource list for every name that was spoken and those that are yet to be spoken in this conversation. Thank you. Hi, Imani.
Hello. Hello. I think for me, defining anti-racism in this moment involves recognizing the vitality of all who I'm interacting with, and making sure that that there is an equitable relationship between myself and those that I'm very close to, strangers, my family. And with that comes recognizing all of the factors, all of the historical factors, cultural factors, spiritual and religious factors that led me to those that I'm interacting with and those that I have the honor of sharing space with from moment to moment, whether that be physical or technological. Yeah. And showing care and making sure that care is truly explored and held honestly and openly on both sides. For me, anti-racism manifests a lot in showing care and in sharing my vulnerabilities and sharing my anxieties, and also providing a space to hold others' anxieties and vulnerabilities and just overall thoughts. Yes.
And Imani, for you, are there particular people or learnings that have contributed to, as Carmen mentioned, the totality of your meaning making around this theme of anti-racism?
Yes. So especially this summer, I have been reading a lot of Octavia Butler. I've been reading and listening to a lot of Adrienne Marie Brown's work in specifically pleasure activism, in survival and resilience, and how her and her sister show love to each other and show love in sharing knowledge. I also have been a part of an ongoing relationship with the community in Africatown, Alabama, as a part of my studies at Oberlin, and the care and the knowledge that I've received from that community has really led me to, I think in many ways has led me to myself as an artist, and has really led me into really honoring knowledge, and in many ways has led me to Ataensic and to this relationship that I have with Carmen and Arthur.
And we are going to talk more about that relationship on the horizon. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for that preview of what's to come. Hey, Arthur, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you? Thanks for having me. So same questions, yes. And I'll try to I want to keep it brief because I think we've had some nice previews and I want to leave space for the rest of those conversations. But for me in this particular moment, my anti-racist practice has been one of active listening. And I would say almost proactive listening, but that moves me outside of kind of my own expectations and kind of my immediate communities, be they kind of relational and familial, but also institutional. And so kind of position yourself to be open to calls in and kind of invitations into other modes of what we would call anti-racist practices. And a lot of that work is through my relationships at Ataensic, but we'll get to that in a second. So for me, what active listening looks like is it's not passive, and it's not just about, although these things are good qualities, awareness, or this idea of acknowledgement, that to me feels like a first step, but moving more toward this idea of kind of listening and then followed by action, and that whole of accountability. That kind of looks to kind of the leaders, like who's already doing the work of anti-racism in my community, and what talents, skills, labor, what my physical, and in this way, digital presence, like how can I be available to kind of join that work, as opposed to reproducing that labor somewhere else, or kind of sidestepping it, or kind of, fracturing the work in my community. I think that's been like my biggest challenge in this moment, or my call to this moment. It's not really a challenge. I was like, how do I become available with what I have to bring? And through a practice of listening, but then through accountability and action when the invitation is made. So folks who have been really important in my own development, I always have to acknowledge my indebtedness to the brilliance and generosity of Toni Morrison. Something I encountered her work at a very young age, and just something broke inside of me, where I not only recognized or I could hear in her work the experience of others, but it also brought me in touch with my own humanity in a way. And the fact that her work could do that, like, has always been meaningful to me. So she's someone I revisit a lot. And it's been, and also part of my friendship, my early friendship with Carmen was a lot of discussions around Toni Morrison's work. And so there's something very personal to that. But more recently, I've been thinking a lot about, through artists and poets as well. A few I'd highlight would be Renee Green as an essayist, as an artist, as a theoretician. Sandra Perry's work has been deeply moving and meaningful to me in the last few years. Carmen's, I first met Carmen in the space of an art installation through their work, through Carmen's work. And so Carmen's art has always been both a call in and a challenge to kind of my own understanding of this moment and the work that needs to be done. And then poets like Phil Metris and Kathy Hong Park, and also Kathy Hong Park's new book, Minor Feelings, has been really instructive as moving away from kind of head acknowledgement and into more embodied ways of knowing and being together in this moment. I said it'd be brief, but now I feel like I'm listing, so I'm just going to leave it there and make space for others.
Oh, we are fully in the conversation, so let the spirit move you as it will, Arthur. Absolutely. And actually, what you just named is a great segue for Carmen to speak about this embodied presence that Ataensic really is. Ataensic has been referred to as a place, a project, and a people. How is each form of the project addressing anti-racism? And where are the impacts of these practices most felt?
There's so many places I could go in that question. I think I think the most fundamental thing to know about the project is that it is a work, it's art. And so it really is the embodiment of the function, purpose, and impact that art can have in a place. And so this week only will I receive the deed and the keys to the structure, but the project has existed since I had a dream about it in 2006 or 7. And it was just an image of the space itself and the ancestors present inviting me to bring this idea into the here and now. And so for me, the project is more about showing than explaining or telling people what anti-racism is. but in the design of the project, centering the cultural imagination and the spiritual imagination of an artist, and particularly an artist of color, is at the root of the project. So just today, I received an email regarding an exhibition in which the project is being invited as a work to be exhibited as a part of an exhibition. So for me, the standpoint and the ground in which you develop your work on is just as important, if not more important, than the project itself. And so while it is a place, it has been embodying its purpose in its programming since about 2016, 2017. So we did virtual programming because we didn't have space before the pandemic. All of the programming has always been about showing people our purpose and inviting and attracting other relationships and partnerships. I think not underestimating one's own practice and one's own vision of their work is key here. So I didn't go about starting a project simply because, you know, I want my work to be seen in the world and people to experience it and like it and name it as important. I started the work of bringing this project into being after the death of my grandfather. And so being present with him in his work of closing out his life catalyzed me to manifest this project. And the witnessing of his lived work in his body was important to me. And the ways in which his practice as an industrial artist wasn't fully realized, that catalyzed me to create in the place where I was born and live and currently live, to center that reality as a professional practice rather than a hobby or avocation in neighborhoods where there are artists everywhere who don't get to be professional artists, in a neighborhood where there are leaders whose leadership isn't acknowledged, where there are people who need access to the space to imagine and have their work affirmed so that it too can become into being, so that all of us can be impacted by it. So for me, it's an intervention, it's an arts intervention, this project, that happens to be a nonprofit with a founding board and director.
And Imani, in many ways, you are experiencing this arts intervention while you are also in the midst of your studies. I'm curious if you're willing to share, based on the skin that you are in, based on your lived experiences and where you are along your artistic journey, what's unique about how learning unfolds and feels for you in the space of Ataensic? Can you bring to light a bit more of what Carmen was sharing through your own experience and journey with Ataensic?
Yes, I can. I think, well, something that's important to me to note is that I was introduced to Carmen and to Ataensic from one of my professors, one of my art professors, Nanette Yanutzi Macias at Oberlin, because I had made it clear that I wanted to learn from her and she had made it clear that she wanted to have an ongoing relationship with me. And so it was in the middle of talking together and catching up after almost an entire year of really not seeing each other at all, not talking at all, that she had introduced me to Carmen and introduced me to the work of Ataensic. And I think the fact that that relationship led me to another relationship that was deeply important to my practice really shows the work of Ataensic. And the fact that Ataensic is in the same city, in the area that I grew up in, is very important to the story of the work. And as I learn what being an artist means and what pursuing art and creation as my professional path, and really just as my path as a person, it's been important to me to experience this relationship and experience the work of Ataensic with someone who is also Black and also Indigenous and also currently lives in the same place that I grew up, and who has connections to the place that I'm currently going to school at, and who has many of the same threads that I feel have been important to my development as a person. And I think Ataensic's work really lies in being open and honest. Ataensic isn't trying to be anything, and it really just is. And the space is really showing itself in telling its own story as a place for artists and individuals to really think about their own journeys and think about their own work and connect on a very deep, meaningful level that really invites creation, invites relationship, and invites knowledge sharing. And so I think that's important for me to experience now while I'm still learning techniques of my practice, and to see where that can take me. Yeah. I could say more, but we...
Oh, please do. please do, Imani. And in particular, on this point that you just made regarding Ataensic's ability to be this space of creation making, to be this space of relationship building, to be this space of knowledge sharing. How might these experiences be replicated for artists in places beyond Ataensic?
Something that Carmen told me that I've thought about a lot is the fact that, like, the honesty of what's being done has invited like a plethora of relationships. I don't think it's a matter of really replicating the work that Ataensic is doing, but just being honest and really seeking connection with other artists and connection with other creative people. Yeah, and I think this culminating moment, this moment that we're having right now, the momentum of having a space, a physical space and meeting place in Cleveland, and preparing for our grand opening is really it really shows like the honesty that has been in place since the initial vision of Ataensic. And that the relationships that have been built in this process have taken a long time to form, because real, honest, ongoing relationships take years to build. And the fact that Ataensic is in this culminating moment, in the time of meeting virtually, and in the time of really, not having many physical spaces to come together, really shows the honesty and the need for this work and this connection. Yes.
We'll just take a purposeful pause to reflect on 3 words, and maybe we'll let the words begin to float around and disintegrate into feeling. The notion of real, the notion of honest, and the notion of relationship. Just letting the sand settle a bit on that. Arthur, from what I've learned about you, you are very much in a practice of cultivating real, honest relationship. How are you being attentive to your anti-racism practice in community with fellow artists at Ataensic? And what does real, honest relationship look like, practically speaking, in these times?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's about, I mean, these are all words that we, like, I love that we took a moment for that, and because we want to hold on to them. But the weight of those words, for me anyway, they're heavy, right? Because it's, they feel good when we have them, but the time in and the work to kind of experience them in deep, meaningful, impactful ways that lift everyone up with us is a lot at times. And so I would say, like, I appreciate the acknowledgement of, like, you know, I'm someone who wants to cultivate these things, but I wake up a lot wondering how close I am to them, you know, and I'm always reflecting on that. So in these times, it's right. Like in these times specifically, we launched a project in the COVID times, in the winter, and it's called In Theory and In Practice, and it's a working group. We wanted, maybe it started as a reading group in a way, but we always wanted it to be a working group because we wanted it to be expansive enough. And in that kind of naming, it's like we want to encounter a lot of theoretical things, a lot of our curiosities, but we also had this eye. It's like, all right, what does it look like when we together as a community, as a group who's gathered here, hit the ground with these ideas and we start to work out their implications in real time and in real space. And I'm attentive, I'm aware of the questions that are kind of probably being raised and how you framed that to Imani as well. Is like, that project started, it's just an extension of a conversation that Carmen and I had been having for a couple of, like since over a year, like, but since we first met. And one of the questions we had is like, well, a lot of us are talking about socially engaged art practices, and we see it in everyone's grant applications. We see it in everyone's didactics. We see it in everyone's thank yous and their acknowledgements. But like, for the life of me, I have no idea what it really is for me, you know? And so like, you know, one of my own questions, like, am I even an artist, or am I an educator, or am I doing social work? Am I doing community engagement? And so we were saying like, well, what does it look like to gather these things under the banner of art? And we had the conversation, we shared notes, we wrote letters, we talked on the phone, and then we opened it up. And I think, you know, again, doing these types of works, these projects, there's a commitment, there's time in, but sometimes it's also being attuned to, sometimes it's knowing when to open it up to others. And we framed it with a question of, we sent out invitations, almost like to a dinner party, and says like, hey, we're going to do this. Would you like to come? And if you are, we had a small prompt for the first meeting. It's like, what about this invitation kind of like stirred up something in you? And what are you, and so we asked like, what are you curious about with this, through this invitation? And that became really a foundation of this practice of a meeting. And so it's a place to be real, honest, and to build relationship. You know, and this sounds like a little brag, but like, you know, it's a space, like, I don't know most of those people in the room when we started, but I'm hearing and personally sharing some of the most intimate things about my own struggles as a practitioner, as an artist, and just as a human being in this space with people, because of the way they can show up in the room and the way in which we're taking care of each other. So in some ways, like, kind of the disadvantages or the limits of COVID and the pandemic times have also, it became an opportunity to kind of open up and try something a little different, because we had this sense, we were kind of tuned into what was going on in our community in a particular way, that people wanted to find a way to be together, to kind of share these feelings and to work something out. So post, when we, you know, it's not like even in the meantime, it's like in the right now, we're also we feel like we are doing that work. And what's happening, and I'll just end with this. What's happening right now is we're actually attracting a lot of folks who feel like Carmen was saying, that the communities, the traditions they come from, the families they come from, they're like, there were these lost or repressed or barred or kind of art practices. And so we're finding a lot of people who are rediscovering or reclaiming, or for the first time have a support structure to do the thing they were already doing. And that to me is a sign of, you know, the work is working. Right. So, and I'm grateful for that. I love being a part of that community.
Arthur, thank you for, and Imani and Carmen as well. I want to just celebrate the three of you for putting language to feelings in the way that you are, that as someone who's observing your conversation and observing your experience, you're making it so visual to see the ways in which connection is so intentionally built at Ataensic. And Carmen, I could not help but see the smiles on your face as you were listening to Imani and Arthur. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to your colleagues, your teammates, your partners in this work. Are there any thoughts that are emerging for you?
Well, what I was smiling about was I was experiencing kind of us being Ataensic, right? So as Arthur was describing what, quote unquote, we do out there, but I was experiencing it in here. And so that alignment around being and embodying who and what we say we are about and what we do, it felt good to witness that. And it feels good to be a team, because prior to this moment, you know, there's been kind of small teams on kind of project-based as the project was growing. And now we're at a point where we have kind of a consistent team over time. But the other thing I want to say to the audience in particular, is how much I've had to say no in service of attracting the right relationships. And I didn't want this conversation to make it seem like all it takes is to be connected. There's certain connections that need to be let go of in the pursuit of this work, and to be okay with saying no and letting go and inviting people to return when they're in a different place with a different perspective. And I've said no to individuals. I've said no to other organizations. I've said no to funders. And I think it's important that you have the courage in your practice to say no in an anti-racist context.
Carmen, may we stay here just a bit longer? And whether you want to call this an anti-racism practice or a practice without an additional label, what are those practices within Ataensic that feel most important to share with our communities near and far? And thank you for acknowledging our audience. You know, which of these practices are most important, not to replicate, but to activate in ways that are aligned with any given community based on what they're experiencing?
The first thing that comes up to me is to have a non-hierarchical value on resources, knowledge, and the materials to do the work. And so whether it's a piece of wisdom from my 5-year-old nephew, or some Skillshare I'm in, or some degreed program that I invested in my life, all of it is material for use in my practice. And if I put a valence of good or bad, or more powerful or less powerful a relationship or connection, that is the beginning of collusion. And I'm dishonoring the mission of the project. I'm just dishonoring my own purpose and my own practice. And so for me, endeavors like this are integrative. And so this is an opportunity to integrate your story as a part of an embodied practice. And it's an invitation to others to start thinking about their own life and work in that way. So removing the borders and boundaries of what it means to be an artist, what it means to create experiences that are about education. You know, for me, I am a lifelong learner. And that's an invitation that I have to all of my relationships, all of the project's partnerships. What are we learning in this process of being together, and allowing not the plan to be implemented, but what's the potential that will emerge through the investigation between myself and the other, between the project and a particular organizational partner.
It's not about the plan. It's about the potential to be emerged.
Mm-hmm. So for example, after the death of Toni Morrison, you know, I had a urge in me to want to do something. And I felt that others would have that feeling as well. And so we did, so Ataensic gathered people and we took a trip to Lorraine. And we used the language of pilgrimage. That is, it was an intentional kind of journey to honor Toni and Toni's contribution as a human being and as an artist, and on a place-based relationship. My own grandmother grew up in Lorraine. And so we went to the gravesite of Toni Morrison's parents and put an offering down. We traveled to the Lorraine Historical Society as a community, and got access to the archives. Again, relationships. When we reached the Lorraine Historical Society, the executive director of that organization turned out to be my former high school principal. So there were certain synchronicities that happen when you do work in this way. And so we got access to the archives in a way that we probably wouldn't have had if it wasn't for the historical relationship that I had with Barbara. And then we went to the Bench by the Road in Oberlin, which is a project that the Toni Morrison Society does. And we shared a meal together. And then we returned to Cleveland. That was the day, that was the experience, that was the work.
I'm experiencing the connection, the synchronicity, and it reminds me, Imani, of the story that you shared about how Ataensic entered into your world through a relationship with your professor and your professor knowing Carmen and the work of Ataensic. It's just the interconnectedness here. It cannot be denied. I just needed to lift it up and name it. I know you all see it all the time. Imani, for you, are there any particular practices at Ataensic that you would like to name as being important for sharing with communities?
So I want to uplift Arthur mentioning in theory and in practice, because I joined the dialogue after a few sessions after they had started, and I feel that I was welcomed very openly, and I could see the care and the interconnectedness between each person, and I could see like the depth of conversation very quickly. There was a lot of trust there, and I see Ataensic's work really in the space for me. I'm excited about the space coming together. Carmen and I walked through the space a few weeks ago, and there is a garden installed with all native Ohio and Great Lakes region plants, with a few little paths to be able to just walk through and feel the history and feel the place coming up to greet you. It's exciting to look at, and it's a place that I want to invite my friends and fellow artists and my family to come look at. And the house has its own story, and it's very clear to see. And it's very clear in many of the even design decisions that were made, that it is a meeting ground. And it's a place to really talk. Yeah. Those are the ways that I've seen Ataensic's work. And I see it in really every gathering with Carmen and Arthur. There's a lot of trust given to all the contributors of Ataensic. And there's a space to say yes, and there is space given to say no. Throughout the projects that I was involved in, I was given a lot of space to say, I don't want to do this, and given a lot of space to say, I don't want to do this right now. And I really appreciate that. And it really shows like the type of relationship that has been forged. Yeah. I even looking through, I've been gathering pictures of Ataensic's history, of Cleveland's history, and I see the care given to Black and Indigenous creative people, Black and Indigenous artists. In the past events, in the residence, Carmen and the artist Sandra Perry had a dialogue together that really showed what a relationship is to me, and really showed what an equitable and honest friendship, relationship, and conversation between two artists, what it can be and really should be. So I see Ataensic's work in the relationships that have been made and in the events that are being planned currently and in the future residents of the space. It's very clear to see how creation is being held.
Arthur, you look ready to share.
I'm just excited, yeah,
Yes,
by
bring it.
what Imani is sharing, and it just it reminds me of the kind of moves that we're wanting to make. Are, we are responding to a particular moment in time, right? In a way, but also like we're looking back in time, and kind of like a lot of our practices we talk about is like there's we're kind of excavating and kind of digging things up, both as acts of recovery, but also acts of reckoning. And in this kind of like the terraform, like those layers you see in the cutouts of like when you kind of drill down and you take a core sample of like settler colonialism and like institutional racisms and how these kind of play out in our particular community. So we're both recovering things that have been lost, and through acts of kind of physical institutional violences, things that have been forgotten that were like life-giving and joyful practices that occurred in better relationships with the environment and the community. And then also things that have been taken and stolen, recovered. Like, so it's just always like shifting, but also there's like this other way of taking that as the wisdom for the present and then looking forward as well. And that one of the things I think that we're seeing a lot of our work, the rigor of the work comes in not only responding to the present moment, but imagining and kind of taking the risk to imagine a long time from now. And like, what are we going to be together? And like who might need us? Who might need a Ataensic at some point? Because a part of it is a retreat center, like it's an art gallery. It's like you said, it's all these things. Like to dream and create and kind of be stewards of something that's big enough for whoever might show up at the right time. To me, that's both like, I feel the weight of that a lot in our conversations and in our work, but also it's both exciting and also like, okay, we have a lot to do. And so there's a deliberate act, and in that, like also response, it's like also not competing with the organizations around us for like and being more strategic about how we're thinking about local and national, international funds that are available. I'll speak from my perspective. We're not interested in competing with people who are doing great things. We want to be we want to not just be in a professional relationship with them. We want to be friends with them and support them. And so it becomes this like nurturing habitat in our community. And institutions who have historically, and I'll just say it, white-led institutions in our community, they have a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of agency, who've like kind of really narrowed what it means to be an artist in our community, is not just taking cues from them, and a lot of are like kind of feeling beholden to kind of what has been, but also kind of come up through the cracks, and kind of restore things, but also kind of like, when I was talking about accountability earlier, is like in some of our relationships, holding people accountable to the things that they post on their Instagram if I can be flippant a little bit and just say, what does that really look like? And being not just an alternative model for that, but being the place where people want to be, being a place where people want to come and to do that kind of work is very important to me in my part.
I'm connecting, Arthur, with this line that you just shared. You said, who needs Ataensic? And that segues into one of the questions that have been posed by the audience. Carmen, perhaps for you, who needs Ataensic? Here's the question. Especially in these times, how would you recommend connecting to the artists in communities that we engage if we're not already connected? So how do you go about answering this question of who needs Ataensic, especially when those connections are not previously there?
It's an interesting question, because I think if you're not engaged, who needs you? You know. So I think that's a more significant question as an organization. Like, you know, I experience a lot of people wanting to figure out, quote unquote, what engagement is. And there's very fundamental formula for behavior that that the social psychologist Kurt Lewin developed in like the 1940s. He said that behavior is the function of the person in the environment. And I live in the neighborhood where Ataensic is. And so the fact that I need it means that other people need it. That the intention of the intervention was to create a project that brings the presence that is missing from this city. And I mean Cleveland. And so rather than, replicate or collaborate, what is the thing that's missing from the environment? And are you the person to embody it? Have you done the work in your own life to be able to fulfill that? And if not, do you already have the relationships with people who can join you? And so, Arthur and Imani have been talking about the relationships that have supported this project. But these are relationships that I've been cultivating in my life and in my work for over 2 decades. So while there's a perception that this project is growing very fast in this moment, and really it's taken, most of my life. It's my whole life. But the the intention and the design of the project has always been not to over program, but to program enough to catalyze feedback from the community about what works and what doesn't work, and what they need and what they don't need. And so Ataensic is in a residential community. The house was slated for demolition. And so we were able to get it from the local land bank. But the neighbor across the street, Henrietta, is the block club president. And so she gives me a lot of feedback around the project about what's needed and what's not needed from us. And so, for example, someone asked if we were going to put a sign outside of the house. And I said, no, we're going to put a flag, because people put flags on houses in this community. And so part of distinguishing ourselves in the work isn't about distinguishing ourselves from the environment. I don't know if that answers the question.
And so it is. We will leave it there. Another question from the Q&A regarding the design of Ataensic. Maybe, Carmen, this is for you as well. And Arthur and Imani, please feel free to add in based on your experiences as well. How does the structure of being a 501c3, which is just for tax purposes, for those just getting a bit of the nomenclature, how does the fact of being 501c3 nonprofit align with this concept of a board, and then to what extent does having the board and being a 501c3 work when you are striving to create a non-hierarchical space? What were some of the activities that you've gone through to change the role of the board or evolve the role of the board to meet this desire to be a non-hierarchical space?
Well, we do have a board member that's on the Zoom right now, so I'm curious what Elfie would say about that. Elfie Martinez. So Lisette, go get him. Can Lisette, can you turn on his camera?
I've asked Elfie to unmute. I don't know if I can
Okay.
turn on their camera.
He's probably wearing a sweatshirt and in a hoodie or something. But I think, you know, part of the board structure right now is still a relationship-based invitation, as well as the skill sets that the board members bring. It's been important that board members are diverse across age, race, gender identity, place. So we have board members who live in the neighborhood. We have board members that live across the U.S., you know, east, south, and west. So it's been important that those relationships kind of cover different fields of practice, different viewpoints. And that, you know, their role is to use their relationships and their network to support this and their networks to support this project. The board members have titles that are in alignment with the roles of a 501c3, and those titles are irrelevant when it comes to our meetings and when it comes to the work. So I'm not saying that they just have these titles to have them, but I am, but I am saying that Elfie wasn't able to stay the whole hour, but I am saying that their investment in the work of the project has been around, Elfie is here, is to support the project, you know, over time, based on their current needs. So also thinking about what's going on in the life of that board member.
Welcome, Elfie.
Hello, everyone. My apologies. I was so excited to connect that I threw myself off of Zoom. So, oh boy. So I think, yeah, may need you to repeat the question because I'm still a little bit flustered here.
Take your time, settle in. You are right where you need to be.
So Elfie and I have known each other for over 15 years. Elfie and I were co-learners in a diversity practitioner certificate program that was supported by an organization called NTL Institute that I mentioned earlier. So Elfie and I have been aware of the work of each other's purpose over time. And so part of, I think, his ability to give me feedback around the project, as well as support the organizational structure, both of those things have been necessary. And so I want to turn it over to Elfie if he can come in, but we both have a practice that is hybrid in terms of being consultants who are also creatives. And that's been an important voice and perspective. And as people of color doing this work in a way where the systems that we've been a part of have marginalized us. And now we're both in a place where things are more integrative. So I want to invite Elfie to kind of share his perspective on that.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you, Carmen. And it's wonderful to see all of you today. And building off of what Carmen was just saying, someone that does have a hybrid practice of being a consultant and a creator, I work primarily in the corporate America space with Fortune 500 companies. So when we talk about, where is wealth concentrated, where is power concentrated, these are like the ultimate places that could basically change everything if they were ever to actually commit to doing something more than awareness. But that is rarely, ever the case. And so, yes, when we encounter systems like this, I have found that the creative piece of me and my canvas is words. I'm a television writer, so I was in development programs at both Warner Brothers and CBS. But I found when we talk to people in corporate America that my screenwriting expertise actually is just as valid, if not more helpful, in terms of people actually being able to find a space in this work. Because it's not until you find your personal connection, your personal story about why things like diversity, equity, inclusion matter, that it becomes real. Oftentimes we find that, especially when I talk to executives, it is a problem apart from me, right? This is something that's happening out in my organization that other people are talking about. And because of that, I guess I should do something, but they never see themselves as part of their own systems, at least not in the beginning. So I find that storytelling and finding these personal connections are the only ways to make any types of substantial and sustainable progress. Otherwise, people will just keep, basically going through some version of either co-opting a movement to provide, symbolic gestures that really don't change anything. So I think, sadly, about the last several months in our country, despite the protests, besides the large numbers of people marching in the streets, what has changed really, right? What they changed, they took Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben off the box, right? I mean, that's pretty much all I can point to in terms of things that have actually changed. And so it's these symbolic gestures that need at some point to convert into action, right? Because these intentions, until they convert into action, are just that. It's awareness. And at some point, awareness has got to convert to action, or people will just stop believing that there is a possibility for something different. So these are some of the dilemmas that I had to deal with. I deal in environments that have been used to doing the least, that are suddenly be asked to do the most. And they are stunningly ill prepared to do that. So when we see things like anti-racism in corporate America, I mean, I have very little confidence that that is something that is real, because you're asking people to go from one extreme to the other, right? Corporate America has been dragged in kicking and screaming to most of these conversations. And now all of a sudden, they're saying that they want to take an active role in dismantling the systems that have been the source of their power. It's just something that would take a lot of time and effort. So a lot of what I do is incremental. There's the old saying, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time? And so that's kind of been our approach. It's much more, the approach that I do in my daily basis, it's much more evolutionary than revolutionary. But, Carmen and I have had many conversations about, where are the actual indicators of progress? Like, if we look at 2020 versus the 1950s, when you look at something like Brown versus Board of Education, for all of the talk, for all of the illusion of progress, we are just as segregated as we were in 1964. So, these are the kinds of things that I struggle with when I do my day job, is realizing that I am swimming against a very strong current in environments that, where typically I'm the only person that looks like me that's not pushing a broom. So people will give me the courtesy of talking to them, but they'll rarely give me the commitment of changing their behaviors. And that is just inherently part of the progress. I mean, part of the work is realizing it's oftentimes 2 steps forward, 1 is 7, 8 steps back, and just being able to stick in during those types of conditions. So very roundabout way of kind of trying to build in what my perspective is in doing the type of work, and the perspective I bring into Ataensic is that very kind of pragmatic results-based approach, because again, being someone with an MBA and having a background on Wall Street, converting a lot of these things into the language of finance has been how I've been able to gain any traction at all. People don't care about doing the right thing, but they do care about maximizing their business. And so if I'm able to be a value translator, then oftentimes I can make progress where appealing to someone's morality doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elfie. And the surprise guest. I mean, you got to come to the conversation to get the surprise guest. You just never know when it's going to happen. Carmen, thank you for inviting Elfie in the way that you so gracefully did. Again, modeling Ataensic. I feel like Ataensic is both a noun and a verb coming out of this conversation. You all you're Ataensic, excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, how do you create the space for everyone and for everyone's voice and for everyone's, the harm that this system has done has diminished the resources and the capacity to do anything different. And so for me, the ground has to change in some way, but you have to experiment and practice with those possibilities first. And that's, for me, is what Ataensic is. It's the container to experiment in a way that the system out there has never allowed you to play. And who might we be if you can play differently? And who might you be if you can play differently?
No better words to close this conversation on than those. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Imani. Thank you, Arthur. And thank you, Ataensic. And Elfie, thank you as well. Lisette, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for everyone who spoke today, who had thoughts today, who was sending good energy to everyone here on the screen. Our reflection session, like I said earlier, will be this Thursday, November 5th, with Toya Lillard from Vibe Theater. And you can take all your questions, all your energy, and bring them with you on Thursday and really just co-learn together and just, I mean, I don't know what world we'll be in on Thursday, but wherever we are, however we'll be, we're gonna be there together. So thank you everyone for being here. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.